The story begins in a small town tucked between rolling hills and slow-moving rivers, a place where seasons changed gently and life moved at a pace that felt almost suspended in time. The town was not extraordinary, nor was it famous for anything in particular. But as with every place in the world, it held people, busy, tired, hopeful, disappointed, dreaming, and always rushing towards something or away from something. And in the center of this ordinary town lived a child who would one day do something extraordinary, remind the world what it meant to care. Her name was Liana. She was 8 years old, small but stubborn, and endlessly curious about everything from why bees buzzed to why grown-ups walked so fast that they forgot to look at the sky. She had big brown eyes that noticed things others overlooked and a quiet bravery that came from a heart untouched by cynicism. Liana lived with her mother and older brother in a tiny house that always smelled faintly of vanilla because her mother baked on the weekends to earn a little extra money. They weren't wealthy, but Liana never felt poor. She had a backyard full of dandelions she pretended were wishes waiting to be collected, and she had a mother who loved her loudly enough to drown out any silence the world created. Every morning, Liana walked to school along the same path, past the bakery, through the park, and across the old stone bridge that stood like a memory of the town's history. Most people walked past that bridge without a second glance, but Liana always paused to look over the edge, where the river flowed steady and calm. One winter morning, while crossing the bridge, Liana noticed something odd, a small, shivering puppy nestled inside a cardboard box. The box was barely holding together against the wind, and the puppy's whimpers were thin, fragile threads of sound. Liana froze. She had never owned a pet. Her family could barely afford extra blankets in winter, let alone an animal to care for. But the sight of that tiny, trembling creature stirred something deep in her chest. She knelt beside the box, her backpack slipping off her shoulder. "Hello," she whispered. The puppy lifted its head weakly and blinked. Its fur was dirty and matted, its paws raw from the cold ground. Without thinking, Liana removed her scarf, a knitted one her mother had made for her birthday, and wrapped it gently around the puppy. "You're not alone," she said softly. "I'll help you." She lifted the box carefully and carried it the rest of the way to school, her arms aching but her heart set. When she reached the schoolyard, classmates gathered around, murmuring with surprise. Some looked concerned. Others looked confused. A few shrugged and walked past without a second thought. Her teacher, Ms. Rowan, knelt beside Liana and examined the puppy with gentle hands. "Where did you find him?" "On the bridge," Liana answered. "Someone left him there. He was so cold. I couldn't just walk away." Ms. Rowan let out a slow breath, part sadness, part worry, part admiration. "You did the right thing. Let's take him inside and call the local shelter." But the local shelter gave them an answer that crushed Liana's hopes. They were full. Winter was always the hardest season, and abandoned animals doubled during the cold months. "We can add him to a waiting list," they said, "but we can't take him today." Liana stared at the phone as Ms. Rowan hung up. She looked at the puppy, his small body curled into the warmth of her scarf, and felt her throat tighten. "We can't leave him outside again," she whispered. "No," Ms. Rowan agreed. "We can't." And so began a ripple, small at first, almost invisible, like the first drop of rain before the storm. The principal allowed the puppy to stay in the school clinic for the day. Students visited during breaks with blankets, snacks, and kind words. Someone's father brought a small pet bed. A girl from another class offered a pair of wool socks for warmth. Even the janitor stopped by to place a heater near the bed. Word spread quickly. Parents heard through their children's excited chatter. Neighbors heard through passing conversations. By evening, the story had traveled across the town. A little girl saved a puppy on the bridge, and now the whole school is taking care of it. But kindness has a way of growing when people witness it. That night, one of the parents posted a picture of Liana and the puppy wrapped in her scarf. The picture was simple but powerful, an image of a child holding hope in her arms. Within hours, the post circled through social media, gaining hundreds of shares, then thousands. Comments poured in. "This child has more compassion than most adults. We need more people like her. Where is this town? I want to help." And with those words came action. By the next morning, donations began arriving at the school, bags of dog food, blankets, medicine, and even small toys. A local veterinarian offered free treatment. Another shelter volunteered space. Several families expressed interest in adoption. But something else happened too, something no one anticipated. People began looking around their own neighborhoods. If an 8-year-old could stop and help something so small, what were they overlooking? What had they chosen not to see? A few students started checking local parks after school. They found not just animals, but people, an elderly man struggling to carry groceries, a single mother needing help with her stroller, a teenager crying quietly on a bench. They stopped. They helped. Adults took notice. One bakery began offering free warm bread to anyone sleeping on the streets. A tailor mended worn blankets and jackets for free. Volunteers organized weekly visits to the local care home. The kindness spread like sunlight, slowly filling a room. And at the center of it all was Liana, who never expected anything to come from her simple act of care. When the veterinarian examined the puppy, she discovered he was malnourished but otherwise healthy. "He's lucky you found him when you did," she told Liana. "A few more hours in the cold and he might not have survived." Lucky. The word echoed in Liana's mind, not because she felt proud, but because she realized how close the puppy had come to being invisible. Forgotten. The town gathered at the community hall the day the puppy was released from treatment. Families and children gathered, whispering excitedly. Ms. Rowan stood at the front with Liana at her side, the puppy in her arms, now clean and brighter-eyed. "We are here," Ms. Rowan said, "because one child showed us what it means to care." She reminded us that compassion is not complicated. It's not something reserved for adults or heroes. It's something we all can choose. People clapped. Some wiped tears. Others simply smiled at the little girl who had changed so much without realizing it. Liana stepped forward slowly. She didn't enjoy big crowds or being the center of attention, but she did enjoy telling the truth. "I didn't do anything special," she said quietly. "I just didn't want him to be cold anymore. I think, maybe everyone just needs someone who won't walk away." Silence followed, soft, thoughtful silence, before the applause returned, louder, warmer, filled with something deeper than appreciation. That day, the puppy was adopted by a loving family who promised to bring him to visit Liana every week. She named him Bramble before saying goodbye, a name she said reminded her of something small and tangled that could still grow strong with the right care. Months passed. Seasons shifted. And though the story of the puppy faded from headlines and social media, the change it sparked did not. The town continued its acts of kindness. The shelter expanded. The school created a care club led by students who wanted to help people, animals, and the environment. Strangers began greeting one another more often. People listened more, rushed less, noticed more. And somewhere far beyond that small town, in other corners of the world, the picture of a little girl and a cold puppy wrapped in a knitted scarf continued to be shared whenever someone wanted to remind others of the power of compassion. Liana grew older, but she never forgot the moment she first lifted the shivering puppy from the cold. She didn't become a celebrity or a public speaker or anything remarkable by the world's usual standards. But she lived her life with the same heart she had at 8 years old, one that refused to walk away from someone who needed help. And people remembered her not because she was extraordinary, but because she reminded them that they could be extraordinary. Years later, when asked what she thought about the story that had spread across the world, she simply said, "I only did what anyone should do. I just cared." And in that simple truth, she taught the world something adults had forgotten. Caring is not a gesture. It is not an obligation. It is not weakness or charity. It is choosing to see someone else's pain, and refusing to let them face it alone. And sometimes, all it takes is a child to remind us.